Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can also call us on our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Both of those means can get any current forecasts and any updates to watches, warnings, advisories that we have out. Taking a look now at the two advisories that we do have out. One is for both of these areas, the central interior and the middle Tanana Valley, and that one is a flood advisory that is in effect until 11:30 p.m. tonight, and that is for streams and rivers between the Tanana and Yukon rivers from Fairbanks and the White Mountains west. The other advisory, flood advisory again, is out until 2:30 p.m. Friday, and that is for rivers and small streams east of Fairbanks and the Elliott Highway, including the Chena River upstream of Moose Creek Dam, and that is for the middle Tanana Valley again. Both of those you can see on our website or the weather info line. Now if you look, take a look at our satellite imagery, starting off with our main low here coming up from the south, starting to push into the southern Bering Sea, and out ahead of that you can see the frontal system that is now draped across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, starting to bring rain to southern parts of Kodiak Island and the Bristol Bay area. So watch this again, we can take a look further out to the east. We have an upper level low here in the eastern Gulf that is starting to bring some rain to areas along the Gulf coastline and some areas further inland as well. Taking a look one more time, focusing up a little bit more to the north, we can see an upper level disturbance coming through, bringing a lot of cloud cover to the interior. That is also bringing some rain to central interior up into the upper Yukon Valley. And one last time we'll take a look out. We have some ridging that is moving in over the central Gulf, spreading out over the south central, and you can see some of the clear areas there, really allowing for some temperatures to get higher again, especially in the Copper River Basin area where we were seeing temperatures up around 70 degrees this afternoon. Taking a look now at the forecast for the rest of the day. We'll start off here in the Panhandle area with our upper level low, bringing in some rain, some lighter rain showers to areas along the Gulf Coast, and then again we have some rain pushing a little bit further inland there. Out over the south central, clear as expected with that weaker ridging moving through, and then we have our rain stretching from the Tanana Valley up through the interior and the upper Yukon Valley. But as we get to the Brooks Range and further to the north, high pressure dominating, keeping rain out of those areas. Coming down the west coast of the state, not a lot of activity till we get around Hooper Bay, just some isolated showers out there. And then our main system coming up from the south, bringing in rain to the Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and starting to get to southern places of Kodiak Island and around the Bristol Bay area. And what we'll notice with this system, even though it is slow moving, we're seeing a long fetch of warm, moist air coming up from the south, going to bring a continued stretch of rain to the area. Then way out to the west, we have some areas of fog out there, and our last low here just to the south of the western Aleutians, bringing in some rain, but not quite making it to shimmy at this time. As we move into the nighttime hours, though, we will see some more widespread rain and fog in the western Aleutians from that low that is now pushed off to the east. But as we look at our main system, slow moving again, but the front is now pushing into Bristol Bay area and through Kodiak Island, bringing rain to all of those locations. Rain extending now up into the lower Kuskokwim Valley and places of the Kenai Peninsula and other locations around South Central. We do have some of those showers out ahead of this frontal system in the Copper River Basin, Alaska Range, and in places of the central interior pushing out towards the Eagle and Northway areas. But as we get along the Brooks Range, we are going to see that rain stop as we have some fog developing overnight due to that high pressure helping to keep that environment very stable up there. And then as we drop down to the Norton Sound area just to the east, we will see some showers overnight. But that ridging that was over the south central today, now pushing to the east, going to start to clear out some skies for the Panhandle area. With the exception of way far to the south, we are going to see some showers out there. As we move into Thursday, continuing to see the ridging dominating much of the Panhandle area with just some lingering showers way far to the south. But our main frontal system now pushing slowly but surely further into mainland part of the state, bringing in some rain and fog behind it towards Kodiak and Bristol Bay areas, Alaska Peninsula down by the eastern Aleutians. But starting to see more rain coming into the south central, those nice conditions that we were seeing today going away as we move into the nighttime and Thursday time frame. And now that rain is more widespread throughout much of the southern interior, not quite making it up towards the more northern interior locations and the Brooks Range. High pressure keeping things well to the south of those locations. Seward Peninsula is still going to be pretty nice, but starting to have some rain push in more fully into the Norton Sound area. And then down in the Panhandle, we talked about where a lot of that clearing is still there from the ridging. Moving into Friday then, the ridging is still there, but we're starting to see some of the rain spill over that ridge to places in the northern Panhandle area. Now we are going to see a lot of the drier conditions further to the south. And then we're going to see the widespread rain coming up from our frontal system here with that long southern fetch bringing rain to the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay areas, all the way up the west coast of the state through the Kotzebue Sound area, throughout much of the interior, all the way out to the eastern interior as well, south central. But again, Brooks Range going to be a barrier for that rain. High pressure staying up to the north, keeping a lot of those conditions further to the south. And what's interesting about this low now is it is still the main low pressure center, but it was actually reinforced at this point Thursday night into Friday from a low off of Russia that is starting to push some more cold air down, which is why we have this new cold front developing on this old low pressure system. As we look out to the places in the far western Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we are going to see lingering rain and fog out there, especially as we get further to the west. We're going to see more of that fog, especially around that Shimia area. So for our temperatures as of this afternoon in the Panhandle area, we do have mid-50s for most locations until we get further to the south, getting up into the lower 60s there, and 62 for Yakutat. Around the south central in the 60s for the most part, a little bit colder there, Whittier 58 degrees. And with those sunny conditions in the Copper River Basin, we saw temperatures get up to 70 degrees at Glen Allen 2 p.m. this afternoon. Kodiak 61 degrees this afternoon. In the interior, southern parts of the interior, mid-50s, but as we get further to the north towards Bettles, we are going to see temperatures this afternoon 47 degrees, and as we get to the Brooks Range, further to the north, mid-30s for most locations. Barrow a little bit colder, 33 this afternoon. Kotzebue Sound area, mid-50s for the most part, mid-50s for the Norton Sound area. Gamble out there, a little bit colder, 45 degrees this afternoon, and then taking us to the southwestern part of the state, mid-50s for the YK Delta, extending down to the Bristol Bay area till we get along the Aleutian Range, mid-60s primarily there, mid-50s for the Alaska Peninsula, 62 for Unalaska. So we get out into the Aleutian Islands, 54 degrees for Atka, Adak, and Shimia, and then 53 for St. Paul and St. George. For our lows tonight, we had some issues with our color map, but we can still see the data on the chart. We do have 50 degrees lows expected for Shimia and Adak, 49 for St. Paul, mid-50s for much of the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay areas, dropping down to around 50 for the YK Delta area, mid-40s for the Norton Sound area, as well as many locations in the Kotzebue Sound area, getting a little bit more to the east, dropping down to those upper 30s. Along the Arctic coastline, mid-30s expected there, pretty similar to what they have now, and then into the mid-40s for much of the interior. As we drop down to the south central area, mid-50s down to the mid-40s for some locations, and in the Panhandle area, lower 50s, with some places dropping down to right around 50 degrees. Highs for tomorrow, lower to mid-60s for the Panhandle, mid to upper 50s for much of the south central, mid-60s to around 70s for the interior, and then mid-40s along the Arctic coastline. Out by the west coast of the state, many of the locations upper 50s to lower 60s, and that's going to extend down to the YK Delta and even down into the Bristol Bay area, where we are going to see temperatures get a little bit higher along the Aleutian Range, but as we go down to the Alaska Peninsula, right around 60 degrees highs for tomorrow, and 55 for the central and western Aleutians, with 56 expected high tomorrow for St. Paul. Taking a look at our flying weather, we have some IFR conditions way out to the southwest with a lot of that fog and stratosphere seen out there, and some IFR conditions coming in behind our front as well that are going to start to push up as we look at our afternoon slide in a little bit. Along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see some fog, especially in those morning hours along the Arctic coast, which will bring some IFR conditions to the area. And then with those showers that we're seeing in the southern parts of the Panhandle, some MVFR conditions expected there. In the afternoon, that's going to clear up for the Panhandle, but our IFR conditions are going to start spreading further inland, especially in those mountain ranges all throughout the southwestern part of the state. But some of that's starting to push off of the coastline along the Arctic coast as we get into those afternoon hours. Our pass conditions and AKwx should be VFR for tomorrow. Adigan Pass should also be VFR tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill will start off in VFR, drop down to IFR. Rainy will be VFR going down all the way to IFR tomorrow. Windy Pass also VFR dropping to IFR as that front starts to come in. Isabel Pass should stay VFR throughout the day, as well as Mentasta Pass. Tenedo will start off VFR, drop down to marginal conditions. Portage will start off VFR, drop all the way down to IFR. And Chilkoot and White will both be VFR throughout the day tomorrow. For our freezing levels, you can see our coldest temperatures are way up to the north, and that is extending down throughout much of the northern Bering Sea. Another smaller pocket of colder air over the Panhandle as well, brought in by that weaker upper level low that we saw earlier. Taking a look at our icing for tomorrow, further to the north up in the southern part of the interior, above 8,000 feet there, but as we drop down into the south central parts of southwest Alaska and down closer towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, all above 10,000 feet there, and that's all associated with that front coming in. For our jet stream, we have coming right off of the northwestern part of the state, 100 knots, dropping down pretty quickly to 75 as we head out into the western Bering Sea. Around our low, we have 75 knots just to the south of the Aleutian Islands, dropping down to 55 as we start to head back up towards Kodiak Island. Another little weak jet streak missing the Panhandle area just to the south at about 80 knots, and then over the northwest mainland stretching through the Brooks Range from the Norton Sound area, 65 knots there. Taking a look at our flight level winds now, we'll start off in the eastern portions of the state around our low pressure system, 20 to 25 knots circulating around that low. 10 knots a little bit further to the north coming in the northern parts of the Panhandle. Out over the Gulf, 20 to 30 knots, but as we get over the main part of the state, southwesterly flow, 15 to 20 knots, until we get north of the Brooks Range where it becomes easterly flow out of about 15 knots there. Weaker flow in between those two. And then moving out over the Bering Sea, we have our other low here, northerly flow, 10 to 20 knots, and then becoming southwesterly as we come on the other side of that low, 20 knots there. Just to the south of the Aleutians, we have our strongest portion of our streamlines here, around 50 knots coming towards Kodiak, which could bring in some turbulence to that area for tomorrow. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, we're going to see a similar pattern. Strongest winds in the area, 25-40 knots as we get closer to Kodiak Island, but then dropping pretty quickly as we get out over the Alaska Range and other places around the south central. Southerly flow over those areas, 10 to 15 knots, coming in around our low, 15 to 25 knots, going back over the western portions of the Bering. Out over the eastern part of the state, dropping down really low, just some variable winds around 5 knots there, and then coming in over the Panhandle area, northwest winds 15 knots, picking up to 20 knots as we get further to the south. For our turbulence tomorrow, not much to speak of. The only area is going to be around Kodiak Island, extending up through the Barrens, but with those stronger winds coming in, we will have areas on the southern part of Kodiak Island below 5,000 feet with more of that moderate turbulence expected. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Thoman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving? over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back. We'll take a quick look now at the ice edge. We can see the main ice pack there just to the north of Barrow extending out further to the west. We do have that area expecting to stay relatively stationary through Thursday, but as those easterly winds start to pick up, especially on Friday, this will start to push off towards the west until the next low comes in over the area with that westerly flow coming back. We'll bring it back in. But for the expected short term into the weekend, we are expecting that easterly flow, which will push that main ice pack further off to the west. For our Marines, we'll start off in the southeastern part of the state here. We do have some primarily northwesterly flow, 15 to 20 knots out over the Gulf. But as we get into the inside waters up to the north, southerly flow there, 15 knots. Seas getting up to as high as 6 feet out over the eastern Gulf. Then on Friday, we have still that primarily northwesterly flow, but picking up a little bit, 20 to 25 knots in most locations. Seas now 5 to 7 feet out over the Gulf, 4 to 5 feet in the inside waters. And still way up to the north, we are expecting that to become a southerly wind, about 20 knots there. For Thursday in the south central area, southerly flow as we get out towards Kodiak Island area, 20 to 30 knots there, strongest over the western Gulf. But becoming more easterly as we get up along the coastline, 20 to 25 knots there, and a little bit weaker in Cook Inlet, northeasterly flow, 10 knots. They're getting up a little bit stronger in the southern parts of Cook Inlet, 15 knots. Seas anywhere from 5 to 9 feet out over the Gulf, strongest as we get closer to Kodiak Island. Then on Friday, flow becoming much more south-southeasterly, 15 to 20 knots most locations, weaker up in northern Cook Inlet, only around 10 knots there, and easterly flow in Prince William Sound, 15 knots for Friday. Seas out over the Gulf, 7 to 8 feet, a little bit lower for the Cook Inlet area, 2 to 4, and then 6 feet for the Barrens area down into Shelikof Strait. For the Alaska Peninsula, we have southerly flow primarily, strongest on the Pacific side, 25 to 30 knots there, 15 knots on the Bering side, 8 to 10 feet for seas on the Pacific side, weaker on the Bering side as well, 3 feet there for Thursday. On Friday, still having a southerly direction, changing a little bit to more southwesterly, 20 to 25 knots, strongest seas still on the Pacific side, 8 feet expected for Friday. Starting off in the Aleutians, western Aleutians being a little bit different, southeasterly flow, 15 knots there. The rest of the area, northerly flow becoming more westerly as we get out towards the eastern Aleutian Islands. Pretty light though, 10 to 15 knots, strongest on the southern side of the eastern Aleutians, 20 knots there. Seas only around 4 to 6 feet. Then on Friday, primarily a westerly flow, 15 to 20 knots most locations until again we get out towards the western Aleutian Islands. Southeasterly flow there around 20 knots, seas around 5 feet. For the west coast of the state, primarily a northerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, except for areas south of Nunavik Island. We are going to see easterly flow, 15 knots there. Seas anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, highest as we get closer to St. Lawrence Island. Then on Friday, we are going to see a mixture of directions here. And what's really interesting is we can watch these flows around this area in that counterclockwise direction, showing us that there is going to be a low in between those areas, around 15 to 20 knots with circulation around that low pressure system. And then as we get closer towards the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area, we are going to see northeasterly flow, 20 knots there. Along the north coast, we're going to have winds hugging the coastline, becoming more northerly as we get closer towards the Kotzebue Sound area, 10 to 20 knots, strongest for the northwestern portions from Point Hope up towards Wainwright area. And then on Friday, all easterly flow, a little bit stronger now, 20 to 25 knots, now strongest over the Beaufort Sea, and that's going to have seas around 5 feet, 3 to 4 feet as we get further off towards the west. Quick recap of our weather for the state, starting off with the Panhandle area, high pressure clearing out a lot of the northern Panhandle, but still some showers in the southern Panhandle area. Our main low pressure system and front attached to that, pushing up into the Bristol Bay area through the Kodiak Island, bringing rain from Kenai Peninsula area through the lower Kuskokwim Valley, down through eastern parts of the Bering, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Behind that, we have some rain and fog extending out towards the western Aleutian Islands. And out ahead of our system, we have some more showery precipitation through the Alaska Range up into the central and eastern parts of the interior, down around the Norton Sound area. And high pressure keeping a lot of the rain at bay at the Brooks Range, but we are going to have some fog developing overnight as that high pressure sits in over the area. And for tomorrow, our slow-moving frontal system pushes rain further into the interior, but all through the southern part of the state. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.